fire me or kiss me, but stop pretending you don't feel this too. Her board forced her to hire a bodyguard. Then they gave her an ultimatum that would cost her everything. Welcome back, my lovely family. Before we begin, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I love hearing from you all around the world. And thank you so much for all your sweet comments and support. Melissa Kendall didn't build a billion-dollar empire by listening to other people tell her what to do. At 36, she'd survived more than most people faced in a lifetime. She certainly wasn't about to start taking orders now. The envelope sat on her desk, block letters screaming threats she refused to dignify with fear. Richard Horvath, disgraced former executive with a grudge and far too much time on his hands. The threats were specific enough to be concerning, vague enough to be legal. She tossed the letter aside. She had a $70 million deal closing in 2 weeks. She didn't have time for Richard's tantrum. Her office door opened without a knock. The grim faces of her board members told her everything she needed to know. "We need to talk," David said. 20 minutes later, she was holding herself rigidly in her chair, jaw tight enough to crack teeth. "Absolutely not." "The threats are escalating," Margaret said in that placating tone that made Melissa's skin crawl. "We have a duty to ensure your safety." "My safety is my concern, not yours." Melissa's voice was ice over steel. "I'm not having some stranger follow me around like I'm helpless." Robert leaned forward, smug. "If something happens to you, this company destabilizes. Stock prices drop, investors panic. We have a fiduciary responsibility to protect our assets." Assets. That's what she was to them. Not a person. Not the woman who'd built this company from nothing. Just an asset to be managed. "This isn't a request," David said quietly. "We've already hired someone. He starts today." She was outnumbered, and they knew it. "Fine," she said, the word clipped and cold. "But he stays out of my way." "Ms. Kendall, your security detail is here." Melissa closed her eyes and counted to 5. Then she stood and prepared to make this bodyguard's life difficult enough that he'd quit by the end of the week. The man standing in her reception area didn't look like he'd quit anything in his life. He was tall, easily 6'3", with shoulders that could break someone in half without breaking a sweat. Dark hair, sharp eyes that tracked her the second she appeared. A suit that fit too well to be off the rack. Everything about the way he stood, utterly still, perfectly balanced, screamed military training. Melissa hated him on sight. "Ms. Kendall," he said, his voice low and even. "I'm Conrad Stanton. I'll be handling your security." "I didn't ask for security," she said flatly. "My board made this decision without my input. I don't need a babysitter. Stay out of my way, and we'll get through this without incident." She turned to walk back into her office, dismissing him. He followed. Melissa spun around, eyebrows raised. "Excuse me." "Staying out of your way isn't part of my job description," Conrad said calmly. He moved past her into her office like he owned it, scanning windows, exits, sightlines. "My job is to keep you alive, and I don't need you to like me to do it well." The sheer audacity of it left her momentarily speechless. Men didn't walk into her office uninvited. They didn't speak to her like she was a problem to be managed. "You can leave," she said, voice dangerously quiet. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. It wasn't dismissive or condescending. It was steady, unshakable. "No," he said simply. "The threats against you are credible. Until we neutralize the threat, I'm not going anywhere. You can hate me for it if that makes it easier. But I'm staying." She wanted to scream at him, wanted to call David and demand they fire this arrogant asshole immediately. But something in Conrad's expression stopped her. He wasn't trying to control her. He wasn't enjoying this. He was just doing his job. And somehow, that made it worse. "Fine," she bit out. "But if you get in my way, you're gone. I don't care what the board says." Conrad's expression didn't change. "Understood." She watched him take up a position near the door, hands loosely clasped, posture relaxed, but ready. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was watching the hallway, the windows, the world beyond her office, protecting her. Melissa sat down and went back to work. She didn't need protection. She'd survived without anyone's help. But when she glanced up at Conrad's silhouette against the window, solid, unyielding, something whispered that maybe she'd been surviving alone for too long. She shoved the thought away. By the end of the first week, Conrad was everywhere. Every meeting, every hallway, every elevator ride. He didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't intrude on conversations, but his presence was a constant weight pressing against her awareness. She couldn't escape him. And worse, she couldn't rattle him. She tried to lose him. Day 2. Back-to-back meetings across 3 buildings. He kept up. Day 3. The gym at 5 a.m. He was already there, with her coffee. By day 5, she stopped trying to escape him and started pretending he didn't exist. It was harder than it should have been. "Ms. Kendall, the contract revisions are ready for your review," her assistant said, as Melissa slid into the back of her car. Conrad was already in the front passenger seat, scanning the street before the driver pulled into traffic. Melissa pulled out her tablet, determined to focus, but her gaze kept drifting to the back of Conrad's head, to the way his shoulders filled the seat, to the subtle way he tracked every car that got too close. It was unnerving, not because he was threatening, but because he was so thoroughly, maddeningly competent. The car slowed at a red light. Conrad's hand moved to his waistband, his body tense. "What is it?" "Silver sedan, 2 cars back, following us." Ice slid down Melissa's spine. Conrad directed the driver through side streets until the sedan disappeared. Only then did his posture ease. "False alarm?" Melissa asked. "Maybe," Conrad said, meeting her eyes. "Or they realized we spotted them." The rest of the ride passed in tense silence. When they finally reached her building, Conrad got out first, scanning the area before opening her door. His hand hovered near her elbow as she stepped out, not touching, but close enough that she felt the heat of him. "I'm fine," she said, more sharply than she intended. No," Conrad replied. He didn't move. Melissa looked up at him, frustrated and unsettled, and suddenly, inexplicably aware of how close he was standing. His eyes were looking at her, like she was something precious that might shatter. She turned away and walked into her building, hating the way her pulse was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. That night, Melissa worked late on purpose. If Conrad wanted to shadow her every move, fine. But she wasn't going to make it easy on him. At 11 p.m., her office was silent except for the hum of her computer and the distant sounds of the cleaning crew. She was deep in financial projections when she felt it. That prickling awareness that meant Conrad was watching her. She looked up. He was standing by the windows, backlit by the city lights, completely still. How long had he been staring? "You can leave," she said. "I'll be here for another hour at least." "Then so will I." Melissa set down her pen, irritation flaring. "Don't you have a life? Friends? Family? Anything better to do than stand in my office all night?" Conrad turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Right now, there's nowhere else I need to be." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than they should have been. Melissa's throat went dry. This was a mistake. All of it. She could feel the air in the room shifting, charging with something she could not afford to acknowledge. "I don't need a babysitter," she said, but the words came out softer than she intended. "Good," Conrad said quietly. "Because I'm not here to babysit you, Miss Kendall. I'm here to make sure you're safe enough to keep changing the world." Melissa stared at him, something cracking open in her chest that she'd kept sealed shut for years. No one talked to her like that, like she mattered beyond her stock portfolio or her quarterly earnings, like she was a person worth protecting, not just an asset worth preserving. She looked away first, her hands trembling slightly as she returned to her work. "It's Melissa," she said quietly. "If you're going to follow me around every hour of the day, you can call me Melissa." She didn't look up, but she heard the smile in his voice when he answered. "Melissa." And for the first time since he'd walked into her life, she didn't mind his presence quite so much. The second week started with an acquisition falling apart. Melissa had been negotiating the deal for 3 months, $70 million, a merger that would expand her company into international markets. Now the other CEO was getting cold feet, citing market volatility and risk assessment, every excuse that boiled down to one truth. He didn't think a woman could handle a deal this size. She'd dealt with men like him before. She'd bury him in paperwork until he begged to sign. By 2 a.m., Melissa was still at her desk, eyes burning from screen fatigue. Conrad hadn't said a word in hours. He'd brought her coffee at midnight, water at 1. Now he stood by the window, watching the city like he could see threats materializing in the dark. Melissa rubbed her temples. Just one more section. Then she'd go home. She didn't remember closing her eyes, didn't remember her head dropping to her folded arms on the desk. But when she woke up, disoriented and stiff, the first thing she felt was warmth. Conrad's jacket was draped over her shoulders. Melissa sat up slowly, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. The jacket smelled like him. Clean, faintly woody. Warm. She pulled it closer instinctively before she caught herself. Conrad was still by the window, his back to her. He'd rolled up his shirt sleeves at some point, and Melissa could see the corded muscle of his forearms, the way he held himself with that same unshakable stillness. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "You were cold," Conrad replied without turning around. "You don't know that. You were rubbing your arms 20 minutes ago." Melissa's breath caught. He'd been watching her that closely. The thought should have annoyed her. Instead, it sent a strange warmth curling through her chest. "Why are you still here?" she asked quietly. Conrad turned then, his gray eyes finding hers across the dim office. "Because you're still here. You don't have to." "Yes," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I do." There was something in the way he said it that made Melissa's throat tight. Like it wasn't just his job, like he'd chosen to stay. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. She looked away, suddenly unable to hold his gaze. "I should get home." "I'll drive you. I have a driver. I'm driving you," Conrad said, and the quiet authority in his voice left no room for argument. The ride to her penthouse was silent, but not uncomfortable. Melissa watched the city blur past, still wearing his jacket. She told herself she'd give it back when they arrived. She didn't. Conrad walked her to her door like always, but tonight felt different. The air between them was charged, something unspoken pressing against their carefully professional relationship. "Thank you," Melissa said softly, "for the jacket, and for staying." Conrad's expression shifted, something warm flickering in his eyes. "You don't have to thank me for doing my job." "Is that all this is?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and Melissa immediately regretted it. She sounded vulnerable, hopeful, weak. Conrad stepped closer, and Melissa's breath caught. He was so tall, so solid, and the way he was looking at her made her feel like she was the only person in the world who mattered. "No," he said quietly. It stopped being just a job somewhere around day 3. Melissa's heart hammered in her chest. She should step back, should put distance between them, should remember that he worked for her, that this was inappropriate, that she'd built her entire life on control, and this feeling, whatever this was the opposite of control. But she didn't move. Neither did he. The moment stretched, taut and trembling, until Conrad finally stepped back, his jaw tight. "Good night, Melissa." She watched him walk away, something aching and unfamiliar twisting in her chest. When she finally went inside, she hung his jacket carefully in her closet. She told herself she'd return it tomorrow. She knew she was lying. The charity gala was the kind of event Melissa usually enjoyed. Power players in tailored suits, champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent, and deals made over hors d'oeuvres that would reshape entire industries. She'd closed 3 partnerships at events like this. Tonight, she was hoping for a 4th. What she hadn't anticipated was how different it would feel with Conrad 3 steps behind her. He looked different in a tux, not softer. Conrad would never be soft, but refined in a way that made her mouth go dry. The formal wear emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, the lean strength of his frame. His hair was slicked back, highlighting the sharp angles of his face, and when he'd first appeared at her penthouse to escort her, she'd actually forgotten how to speak for a solid 5 seconds. Now, watching him move through the crowd with that predatory grace, Melissa was acutely aware of every woman in the room tracking him with appreciative eyes. Something hot and possessive coiled in her stomach, which was ridiculous. He wasn't hers. He was her employee, her bodyguard. Nothing more. "Melissa Kendall," a voice boomed across the gallery. "The woman who made Richard Horvath cry in court." Melissa turned with a practiced smile to face Victor, a venture capitalist with deep pockets and deeper connections. "Victor, always a pleasure." They fell into easy conversation about market trends and investment opportunities, but Melissa could feel Conrad's presence behind her like a physical touch. He hadn't said a word since they arrived, but she knew he was cataloging every person who approached her, every hand that got too close, every potential threat in the room. It should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like safety. The evening progressed smoothly until Gregory Hartman cornered her by the bar. Gregory was old money, old attitudes, and old enough to know better than to drink himself stupid at public events. Apparently, he'd missed that memo. "Melissa," he slurred, leaning too close. "You look absolutely edible tonight." She took a deliberate step back, her smile freezing into something razor-sharp. "Gregory, I see you've started celebrating early. Can you blame me?" He moved closer again, and Melissa felt her chest tighten. "Beautiful woman. Beautiful night. We should discuss that tech investment you mentioned last quarter. Maybe somewhere more. Private?" His hand landed on her waist, fingers splaying possessively across her hip, and Melissa's entire body locked up. The room tilted. Her breath caught. For one horrible second, she wasn't at a gala anymore. She was in her old house, pinned against a wall, watching her ex-husband's face twist with rage as his grip bruised her skin. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't... And then Gregory's hand was gone. Conrad had materialized between them so smoothly, it was like he'd never been standing behind her at all. He had Gregory's wrist in his grip, his voice low and absolutely lethal. "Remove your hand." "Now." Gregory blinked, confused and drunk and stupid enough to try pulling away. Conrad's grip didn't budge. If anything, it tightened, and Melissa saw the exact moment Gregory realized he'd made a very serious mistake. You were just leaving," Conrad said, his tone brooking no argument. "Walk away, or I'll make sure every person in this room knows exactly what kind of man puts his hands on a woman without permission." Gregory paled, yanked his hand free and stumbled backward. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then apparently thought better of it and disappeared into the crowd. Melissa stood frozen, her heart slamming against her ribs, adrenaline and old fear mixing into something nauseating. She could still feel Gregory's hand on her waist, could still feel the ghost of other hands, rougher and crueler, from years ago. Conrad turned to her, his expression shifting from dangerous to concerned in a heartbeat. "Are you all right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "We're leaving," he said quietly. And it wasn't a question. Melissa wanted to argue, wanted to prove she was fine, that she wasn't some fragile thing that shattered at the first sign of aggression. But her hands were shaking, and Conrad was already guiding her toward the exit with a hand hovering protectively near her back, never quite touching. The car ride back to her penthouse was silent. Melissa stared out the window, fury and shame warring in her chest. She'd frozen. After everything she'd survived, everything she'd overcome, she'd frozen like some helpless victim. "You didn't freeze because you're weak," Conrad said suddenly, and Melissa's head snapped toward him. "What?" He kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. "You froze because he reminded you of something. Someone." Melissa's breath caught. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I read your file," Conrad said quietly. "Your ex-husband was physically aggressive during the divorce proceedings. It's in the restraining order." The words hit her like a slap. Melissa's hands clenched into fists, anger flaring hot and immediate. "You had no right." "I have every right." Conrad's voice was firm but not unkind. "If I'm going to protect you, I need to know what I'm protecting you from, including your own past. That's not—" Melissa's voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. "That's not part of your job." "Yes," Conrad said, finally looking at her as they pulled up to her building. "It is." The vulnerability in his eyes undid her. This wasn't about protocol or professional boundaries. This was about him genuinely caring whether she felt safe, whether she was okay. And God help her, she didn't know how to handle that. "I'm fine," she said, but the words came out hollow. Conrad studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right." He walked her to her door like always, but tonight the silence between them felt heavier. When they reached her penthouse, Melissa turned to thank him, to say something that would restore the careful distance they'd been maintaining. Instead, she found herself staring at his chest, her voice small. "I hate that I froze." "You survived," Conrad said softly. "That's all that matters." "I should have—" "You should have nothing." He stepped closer, and Melissa's breath caught. "You are the strongest person I've ever met. One moment of hesitation doesn't change that." Melissa looked up at him, something cracking open in her chest. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not her ex, not her board, not anyone. "Thank you," she whispered. Conrad's expression softened. "Anytime." He left, and Melissa stood in her doorway for a long time after he was gone, trying to understand why his absence felt like losing something vital. 2 months into having Conrad shadow her every move, Melissa had developed a routine. She knew when he took his coffee breaks, knew the exact cadence of his footsteps in the hallway outside her office, knew the way his expression shifted when he was assessing a threat versus when he was just watching her work. She knew him, and that was terrifying. Tonight, she was alone in her penthouse, Conrad having finally agreed to go home after she'd all but ordered him out. The acquisition deal had closed successfully. Her stock prices were climbing, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe without the weight of impending disaster pressing down on her shoulders. She'd just gotten out of the shower when she heard it. A crash from the living room. Melissa's heart stopped. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to run, to do something. But her body wouldn't cooperate. She stood frozen in her bedroom doorway, terror flooding her veins like ice water. Another sound, closer this time. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed the one number she'd memorized without meaning to. Conrad answered on the first ring. "Melissa, there's someone in my apartment," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "I'm 2 minutes away. Lock your bedroom door. Stay on the line with me." She stumbled to the door, twisted the lock with trembling fingers, and pressed her back against it. "Conrad, I'm almost there. You're going to be fine." She heard more sounds from the living room, footsteps, something breaking. Oh God, someone was actually in her apartment, and she was alone. And, "Melissa!" Conrad's voice cut through her panic. "Breathe. In for 4, out for 4. With me." She tried, failed, tried again. "That's it. Keep breathing. I'm in the building. 30 seconds. Melissa squeezed her eyes shut, counting seconds, trying not to imagine what was happening on the other side of her bedroom door. She heard the distinct sound of her front door slamming open, heard Conrad's voice sharp and commanding. "Clear!" More sounds. Movement. Her heart was slamming so hard she thought she might pass out. Then Conrad's voice, right outside her door. "Melissa, it's me. You're safe. Open the door." Her hand shook so badly she could barely turn the lock. The second the door opened, she saw him, alert and ready, eyes blazing, whole body coiled for action. He did a quick visual sweep of her, checking for injuries, then stepped into the room. "Building settling," he said quietly. "Knocked a picture frame off your shelf. No one's here. No one's getting in." Melissa stared at him, adrenaline still screaming through her system, and felt the last threads of her control snap. She couldn't breathe. The air wouldn't come. Her chest was too tight, her vision tunneling, and she was going to die right here in her bedroom, because her brain couldn't tell the difference between a picture frame falling and actual danger. "Melissa," Conrad's voice was calm, grounding. "You're having a panic attack. You're safe. I'm here." She shook her head, gasping, her whole body trembling. "I can't. Can I touch you?" She nodded desperately, and Conrad closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped firmly around her shoulders. He was solid. Warm. Real. "You're safe," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." Melissa broke. Years of holding herself together, of being strong and untouchable and perfect, shattered like glass. She sobbed into his chest, great heaving gasps that tore out of her throat, and he just held her. Didn't tell her to stop. Didn't tell her she was being dramatic. Just stood there like an anchor in a storm and let her fall apart. When the tears finally slowed, when her breathing evened out into shaky inhales, she became acutely aware of where she was. Pressed against Conrad's chest, his arms around her, his chin resting on top of her head. She should pull away, should apologize for the wet spot she'd left on his shirt. But she didn't want to move. "I'm sorry," she whispered. That was unprofessional. Conrad pulled back just enough to look at her, his gray eyes intense. "You're human, Melissa. There's nothing unprofessional about that." She laughed, but it came out watery. "I'm supposed to be stronger than this." "You are strong," he said firmly. "But strong doesn't mean unbreakable. It means getting back up after you fall. And you always get back up." Melissa stared at him, something shifting deep in her chest. When was the last time someone had seen her like this, messy and scared and vulnerable, and hadn't tried to use it against her? "Stay," she said before she could overthink it. "Please, just for tonight." Conrad's expression softened. "I'll be right outside your door. If you need anything." "No." She gripped his shirt, suddenly desperate. "Stay here, in my room. I can't be alone right now." She watched. Him war with himself, professionalism battling against something else. Finally, he nodded. "Okay." Melissa changed in her bathroom, trading her robe for sleep shorts and a t-shirt, trying to ignore how aware she was of Conrad on the other side of the door. When she emerged, he'd taken off his jacket and shoulder holster, setting them carefully on her dresser. He settled into the armchair by her window, looking alert despite the late hour. "You should sleep," he said quietly. Melissa climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. She felt like a child, but she didn't care. "Will you be here when I wake up?" "Yes." "Promise?" Conrad's expression gentled. "I promise." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt safe enough to let go. As sleep pulled her under, her last conscious thought was that Conrad Stanton had become the most dangerous man in her life, not because he could hurt her, but because she was terrified of what would happen if he ever left. Conrad was still there when she woke up. Melissa opened her eyes to find him exactly where he'd been last night, sitting in the armchair by her window. His head was tilted back, eyes closed, but she knew he wasn't really asleep. Men like Conrad didn't sleep deeply. They rested with one eye open, ready to move at the first sign of danger. Morning light slanted across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the faint stubble he hadn't had time to shave. He looked younger like this, less like the unshakable bodyguard, and more like a man. A man she was growing far too attached to. "You're staring," he said without opening his eyes, and Melissa felt heat flood her cheeks. "You promised you'd be here," she said, instead of apologizing. Conrad's eyes opened, finding hers immediately. "I keep my promises." Something in the way he said it made her chest tight. She sat up, pulling her knees to her chest, suddenly hyper-aware of how intimate this was. Him in her bedroom, her in sleep shorts and a t-shirt, the early morning quiet wrapping around them like a secret. "Thank you," she said softly, "for last night, for staying." "You don't have to thank me." He stood, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness from sleeping in a chair. "I'll give you privacy to get ready. Then we should talk about upgrading your building's security." He was already moving toward the door when Melissa heard herself say, "Why did you take this job?" Conrad stopped, his back to her. "You were special forces," she continued, her heart hammering. "You could work anywhere. Private military contracts, executive protection for heads of state. Why did you take a job babysitting a CEO?" The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he turned around, and the look in his eyes stole her breath. "3 years ago," he said quietly, "I saw an interview you gave. Right after, your divorce was finalized. The reporter asked if you regretted marrying him." Melissa remembered that interview, remembered sitting in that studio, raw and exhausted, forcing herself to be strong when all she wanted was to scream. "You said, 'I regret trusting someone who saw my success as a threat instead of a partnership.'" Conrad's voice was low, intent. "Something about that stayed with me. The way you refused to be ashamed, the way you turned your pain into power." Her throat went tight. "That was 3 years ago. I know. You've been following my career?" "Yes." No hesitation, no apology. Melissa stood slowly, her pulse racing. "Why?" Conrad held her gaze, and she saw him make a decision. Saw the exact moment he chose honesty over safety. "Because when this job posting came across my desk, I recognized your company name. And when I walked in and saw it was you..." He exhaled slowly. "I didn't plan this. But I knew I was in trouble the second I saw you in person." The air between them felt electric. Melissa took a step forward, then another. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where I'm not supposed to care if you eat, if you sleep, if you smile." His jaw tightened. "But I do. I care about all of it." "Conrad, I'm falling for you," he said, the words rough and honest. "I've been falling since the moment you told me to stay out of your way, and I knew I'd follow you anywhere." Melissa's breath caught. No one had ever looked at her the way he was looking at her now, like she was brave and brilliant and worth protecting, not because she was an asset, but because she was herself. "This is a bad idea," she whispered, even as she moved closer. "I know. You work for me. I know. If we do this, everything gets complicated." Conrad closed the distance between them in one stride, towering over her, his eyes blazing. "It's already complicated, so fire me. Or kiss me. But stop pretending you don't feel this too." Melissa reached up and pulled him down to her. The kiss was fire, desperate and hungry and inevitable. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite the intensity, and she gripped his shirt like she was drowning and he was air. 3 months of tension shattered in a heartbeat, and Melissa couldn't remember why she'd been fighting this. Couldn't remember anything except the taste of him and the way his fingers threaded through her hair and the sound he made when she bit his lower lip. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Conrad rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move. "Stay," Melissa whispered. "If I stay, I'm going to kiss you again." "Good." This time when their lips met, it was slower, deeper, a promise instead of a question. Melissa felt something slot into place in her chest, something she hadn't even known was missing. When Conrad finally pulled back, his eyes were dark and warm and full of things that terrified her. "We need to talk about what this means." "I know." Melissa smoothed her hands down his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palms. "But not yet. Just let me have this for a minute." He kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. "You can have whatever you want." Melissa closed her eyes and let herself believe it. Just for a moment, she let herself imagine a world where she could have both, the empire she'd built and the man who made her feel whole. She should have known better than to believe in fairy tales. Melissa woke up in Conrad's arms for the first time, and for approximately 10 perfect seconds, everything felt right. His chest was warm against her back, his arm draped protectively across her waist. Sunlight streamed through her bedroom windows, painting everything gold. She could feel his steady breathing, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. For 10 seconds, she let herself exist in this moment, where she was just a woman waking up next to the man she was falling for. Then her phone rang. Melissa grabbed it off the nightstand, frowning at the unknown number. "Hello? Ms. Kendall, this is Andrea from your PR team. We have a situation." Ice flooded Melissa's veins. Behind her, Conrad was already awake, already alert. "What kind of situation?" "There's a photo circulating online. You and your bodyguard at the charity gala last week. The angle is compromising." Melissa's stomach dropped. "Send it to me." The photo loaded on her screen, and her breath caught. It was from after Conrad had intervened with Gregory, when they'd been leaving the gala. Conrad's hand was on her lower back, his body angled protectively toward hers, and the way he was looking down at her was unmistakably intimate. The caption read, "Billionaire CEO Melissa Kendall gets cozy with her bodyguard. Mixing business with pleasure?" "Shit," Melissa whispered. Conrad sat up, reading over her shoulder. His expression went carefully blank. "I'll handle this." "How?" Melissa's mind was already racing through damage control scenarios. "The photo's already viral. My board is going to—" Her phone rang again. David Flay's name flashed on the screen. "Emergency board meeting in 1 hour," he said without preamble. "This is a problem, Melissa." The meeting was exactly as brutal as she'd expected. Melissa sat at the head of the conference table, Conrad conspicuously absent per David's pointed request that they speak without distractions. Every board member looked somewhere between concerned and furious. Robert Halverson looked downright gleeful. "This is a liability nightmare," Margaret said, sliding a tablet across the table. On it, the photo had been picked up by 3 major financial news outlets. "Your personal life is affecting the company's reputation." "My personal life is my business," Melissa said coldly. "Not when it involves an employee," Robert interjected. "Not when it creates a hostile work environment. Not when it makes you look unprofessional to our investors." "I haven't done anything unprofessional." "That photo suggests otherwise." Robert leaned back in his chair, smug satisfaction radiating from him. "You're emotionally compromised. Your judgment is clouded. And frankly, having your bodyguard as your companion raises serious questions about his ability to do his job objectively." Melissa's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. "Conrad has done his job flawlessly." "Has he?" Margaret's voice was gentler, but no less pointed. "Because from where we're sitting, it looks like he's been protecting his own interests rather than yours. That's not fair." "Fair or not, it's the perception," David said quietly. "And perception matters, Melissa. You know this. We have a major merger on the horizon. Our stock prices are finally stable. We cannot afford a scandal right now." Melissa felt the walls closing in. "What are you suggesting?" "Fire him," Robert said flatly. "Immediately. Issue a statement that the photo was taken out of context and that you've severed the professional relationship to maintain appropriate boundaries." "No." "It's not a suggestion," Robert said. "It's a requirement. Either you fire him, or we'll vote to remove you as CEO pending a full review of your decision-making capabilities." The threat landed like a physical blow. Melissa looked around the table, seeing the grim determination in their faces. Even David, who'd always supported her, looked resigned. "You're serious," she said slowly. "Completely," Robert replied. "We gave you Conrad to protect you, not to become a liability. This ends now. Fire him, or we fire you." Melissa walked out of that meeting feeling like she'd been hollowed out. Conrad was waiting in her office, his expression unreadable. He took one look at her face and knew. "They want you to fire me," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," Melissa's voice came out flat. "Fire you, or they vote me out as CEO." Conrad nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Then you fire me." "What?" "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." He moved closer, and the determination in his eyes made her chest ache. "You've worked too hard to lose this because of me. I won't be the reason your empire falls. It's not just about the company." "Yes, it is." His voice was firm but not unkind. "This company is your life's work. You built it from nothing while your ex-husband tried to destroy you. You fought for every dollar, every contract, every piece of success. I won't let you throw that away." Melissa felt tears burning behind her eyes. "What if I don't care about the company if you're not here?" Conrad's expression cracked, just for a second, showing the pain underneath. "You do care. And you should. You're Melissa Kendall. You don't back down. You don't let anyone tell you what you can or cannot have. Then why are you telling me I can't have you?" "I'm not." He reached up, cupping her face gently. "I'm telling you to fight, like you always do. But right now, you need to fight for your company. I'll be here when you're ready. But you need to do this first." "Conrad, fire me, Melissa." His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Let me make this easy for you." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she'd burn the whole company down before she let them dictate her personal life. But the weight of everything she'd built pressed down on her shoulders, and she knew. God, she hated that she knew. He was right. "I can't do this," she whispered. "Yes, you can." He kissed her forehead, soft and devastating. "You're the strongest person I know. You'll get through this." Melissa pulled back, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "If I do this, if I fire you, I need you to know it's not because I want to. It's because I don't have a choice. I know." His smile was sad, but genuine. "And I need you to know that I'll be waiting, however long it takes. I'm not going anywhere." She kissed him then, desperate and heartbroken, trying to memorize the taste of him, the feel of his hands in her hair, the way he held her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, Conrad stepped back, his expression shifting into something professional and distant. "Effective immediately, I resign," he said formally. "It's been an honor working with you, Miss Kendall." Melissa watched him walk out of her office, every instinct screaming at her to call him back, but she didn't. She stood there, alone in the empire she'd built, and wondered if winning had ever felt this much like losing. The first week without Conrad was unbearable. Melissa threw herself into work with a vengeance, 18-hour days bleeding into sleepless nights at the office. The board had hired a new bodyguard, a competent woman named Sarah, who was professional, efficient, and absolutely nothing like Conrad. Sarah didn't bring her coffee at midnight, didn't look at her like she hung the moon. Melissa hated every second of it. Late one night, her assistant knocked softly. "Miss Kendall, you should go home." "I'm fine," Melissa said automatically. "With respect, you're not. Is this about Conrad?" After her assistant left, Melissa sat in the silence and acknowledged the truth. She'd made a mistake. Not in firing Conrad, that had been forced, but in thinking her company would be enough to fill the void he'd left. It wasn't. She'd built everything around being untouchable, around never needing anyone. But Conrad had slipped past her defenses so completely that his absence felt like missing a limb. By the second week, Melissa started making plans. The first call was to her accountant. "I need to know my liquid assets, everything." 3 days later, she had her answer. It was enough. The next call was to her lawyer. "I want to buy out my board, every single member." "Melissa, that's going to cost you everything." "I know exactly what it's going to cost. Can it be done?" "Legally, yes. Financially, you'll have to leverage almost everything you own." "Then do it." The next 3 months were brutal. Melissa liquidated assets, cashed out accounts, took loans that made her advisors pale. She lost weight, lost sleep, lost contact with everyone except her lawyers and accountant. Stock prices fluctuated wildly. Industry publications questioned whether she'd lost her mind. Melissa didn't care. Every board member who pushed back got crushed. Every moment she wanted to quit, she thought about Conrad and forced herself to keep going. Robert held out longest, threatening lawsuits. Melissa buried him in paperwork, dug up 3 ethics violations, and made it clear she'd go to war. He folded in week 7. By month 3, Melissa called an emergency board meeting. They filed in looking irritated. She'd given no warning, no agenda. Robert spoke first. "What's this about, Melissa?" Melissa stood at the head of the table. "I'm buying you out. All of you. The room erupted. "On the grounds that this is my company," Melissa said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I built it. I grew it. I turned it into a billion-dollar empire while you sat here questioning every decision. I'm done answering to you." She slid folders across the table. "These are your buyout offers. Generous. More than fair market value. You have 30 days to accept. After that, they decrease 10% weekly." Robert's face went purple. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can. My lawyers confirmed it. Every share, every voting right, every piece of this company will be mine." Margaret looked stunned. "This is financial suicide." "No," Melissa said quietly. "I'm choosing everything. There's a difference." David was the only one who didn't look angry. "Is this about the company or about him?" Melissa met his eyes. "It's about me. For the first time, it's about what I want." She gathered her materials and headed for the door. 30 days. Make your choice. Behind her, the board sat in stunned silence, and Melissa felt freedom unfurling in her chest. 30 days pass. Board accepts buyout. She sat alone in her office the night the final papers were signed, staring at the empire she'd fought to keep, and knew exactly what to do next. She grabbed her coat and walked out. "Ms. Kendall, where are you going? You have a 4 o'clock. Cancel it," Melissa called over her shoulder. Cancel everything. For the first time in 3 months, she had somewhere more important to be. Conrad's apartment was in a quiet neighborhood 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors, and the biggest excitement was the farmers' market on Sundays. It was so far removed from Melissa's world of glass towers and power plays that she almost turned around twice on the drive over. But she'd come too far to back down now. She stood outside his door for a full minute, her heart hammering against her ribs before she finally knocked. The door opened, and there he was. Conrad looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. Same gray eyes, same strong jaw, same presence that made the air feel heavier. But he was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans instead of a suit, his hair slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it. And the surprise in his expression when he saw her was so genuine, it made her chest ache. Melissa. Her name came out rough, like he'd been holding it in his mouth for months. "What are you doing here?" "I heard you bought out your entire board," he continued, stepping aside to let her in. The whole industry heard. Melissa walked into his apartment, taking in the clean lines and minimal furniture. It was so perfectly him, efficient, uncluttered, ready to move at a moment's notice. "You've been keeping track of me." "I never stopped." He closed the door but didn't move closer. "Are you okay? The financial risk you took was necessary." Melissa turned to face him, and God, it was harder than she'd expected to see him again, to be this close and not touch him. "I bought my freedom, Conrad, from my board, from anyone who thinks they have a right to control my decisions. I'm done letting people dictate my life." Something shifted in his expression. That's incredible. "You did it." "I did." She took a breath, forcing herself to say the words she'd been rehearsing for 2 weeks. "But I didn't do it for the company. I mean, I did, but that's not why I'm here." Conrad went very still. "Why are you here?" "Because you were right. I needed to fight. I needed to prove to myself that I could take back control of my life." Melissa's voice wavered slightly. "But you were also wrong." "About what?" "About me doing it for the company." She moved closer, her heart in her throat. "I did it for me. Because I'm done being afraid. Done letting my past control my future. Done pretending I don't need anyone." Conrad's eyes darkened. "Melissa, 3 months ago you told me you'd wait, that you'd be here when I was ready." She was close enough now to see the rapid pulse in his throat, to feel the heat radiating from his body. "I'm ready. I'm choosing you. Not because I have to. Not because it's convenient or strategic or safe. Because I want to. Because you're the only person who's ever made me feel powerful and safe at the same time." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then Conrad closed the distance between them in one stride, his hands framing her face, his eyes blazing. "You didn't have to destroy your board for me. I didn't do it for you," Melissa said, her voice shaking. "I did it for me. So I could stand here and choose you without anyone's permission. So I could build the life I actually want instead of the one everyone expects me to have. And what do you want?" "You." The word came out simple and true. "I want you. In my life, in my company, in everything. If you'll have me." Conrad kissed her, and it felt like coming home. His lips were hungry and desperate, like he'd been starving for 3 months, and she was air. Melissa wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with everything she had, pouring months of loneliness and longing and love into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Conrad rested his forehead against hers. "I thought about you every day," he said quietly. "Wondered if you were okay, if you were eating, if you were sleeping. It was torture. I'm sorry I took so long." "Don't be." He pulled back to look at her, his expression fierce. "You did what you needed to do, and now you're here." "I'm here," Melissa confirmed, "and I have a proposition for you." Conrad raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "My company needs a head of security, someone who understands threat assessment, crisis management, and how to build a comprehensive protection infrastructure." She smiled slightly. "The job comes with a significant salary, full benefits, and the occasional need to tell the CEO when she's being stubborn." "Sounds like a handful," Conrad said, but she could see the warmth in his eyes. "It is. But here's the thing. It's not just a job offer." Melissa's voice softened. "I want a partner, Conrad. In business, in life, in everything. Someone who sees me as an equal, not as something to protect or control or manage. Can you do that?" Conrad was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Then he smiled, slow and devastating. "On one condition." "What?" "You let me keep you safe, not because you need it, but because I need to know you're okay. Deal?" Melissa laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Only if I get to do the same for you." "Deal." He kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise instead of desperation. Melissa sank into it, into him, into the future they were building together. "When do I start?" Conrad murmured against her lips. "How about Monday? I have some restructuring to do, and I could use someone I trust at my side." "Monday," he agreed. Then, quieter, "What about now?" "Now?" Melissa pulled back to look at him, her heart full. "Now you could feed me. I haven't had a proper meal in 3 months." Conrad laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "I can do that." 6 months later, Melissa stood in her newly renovated office, the one with Conrad's desk positioned near the windows where he could see anyone approaching, and marveled at how much had changed. Her company was thriving under her sole ownership. The security infrastructure Conrad had built was state-of-the-art. And more importantly, she went home every night to someone who loved her, not for what she'd built, but for who she was. Conrad walked in carrying 2 coffees, setting one on her desk, before dropping a kiss on top of her head. It was such a casual gesture, so domestic and right, that Melissa had to pause and just breathe it in. "You okay?" he asked, settling into his chair. "Yeah." She smiled at him, this man who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. "I'm better than okay." He smiled, back that rare, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. "Good. Because we have a meeting in 10 minutes about the Tokyo expansion, and I need you sharp." "Always business with you," Melissa teased. "Not always." His eyes heated in a way that made her flush. "But we did agree to maintain some professionalism during work hours." "We did," Melissa agreed reluctantly. "Doesn't mean I have to like it." "Tonight," he promised. "After the investor dinner, you're all mine. Deal." As they gathered their materials for the meeting, moving in the easy synchronicity they'd developed over months of working side by side, Melissa caught her reflection in the window. She looked happy. Genuinely, undeniably happy. She'd spent so long building walls, proving she didn't need anyone, fighting to maintain control. And then Conrad had walked into her life and shown her that strength wasn't about being untouchable. It was about choosing to let someone in and trusting them not to break you. "Ready?" Conrad asked, holding the door open for her. Melissa stood, straightened her jacket and walked toward him, toward their meeting, toward their future. "Always," she said. And she meant it. If you loved Melissa and Conrad's story, let me know in the comments. Would you have fought for love the way Melissa did? Or would you have chosen the company? I want to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more beautiful stories.